Hello, everybody. Just waiting on Aaron to join. Hello. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Hello, hello. Wouldn't it be funny if Aaron forgot? There she is.
I didn't forget.
Yeah.
I sent you a request 3 times before I went through.
Oh, really? That's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I figured you didn't forget, but you never know. It'd be like me to just get distracted and be like, oh, crap.
No, I didn't forget. It's Instagram being
Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
So, welcome to another Monday. I know you had a really busy weekend. We talked earlier today, and I'm the same. It's just like it went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah. It was a blur. It was a blur for me. It was my mom's birthday this weekend too, so I spent some time with her.
But
That's fine. Yeah,
nice.
it was just busy. I didn't get half the things done I planned to do. Typical weekend.
Yeah, same. And this week, our kids are off on spring break. So if you guys hear like crazy ruckus, it's just my kids trying to kill each other. So all right. So today's podcast, I guess we're going to talk about how to balance or what to feed balance over time and how to do it for people. I know that your way of doing it is probably a little bit different than how I would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, we're on the same path as you just need the basic, like a good solid foundation to go
I
off
think
of.
people just need a general guidance in some direction. And even though ours is a bit different, it's still very much the same in a lot of ways. So, I mean, and there again, that's just kind of proof that there's no one right way to do everything.
Right. And kind of leaning on like last week, people that do feed on paper, like they're meeting all of the nutrient requirements, yet they're having issues with that. So there's
well, a lot of people
even
don't take into consideration ingredients when you work with nutrients. Okay, so there's nutrients and then there's ingredients. And if you're just if the sky's the limit for you on paper to use an ingredient to cover a requirement, then it's pretty easy. But maybe you're using something that isn't really an appropriate choice for that species of animal. And then that's where some of the problems can start coming about. Yeah, that's a whole nother hole we can dive into at some point.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so do you want to talk about like what basic foods people should be eating? Like, I know I just posted like what I interpret as what the raw food pyramid should be. And I know, again, like we just said, yours might be a little bit different, but I think the basics should be raw edible bones and boneless muscle meat. Like that should be the majority.
Absolutely.
And so let's talk about what foods or items fall into those categories. So I typically feed a lot of feet, like chicken feet and duck feet. I really love those because even though there's not a whole lot of bone, there's a lot of collagen and connective tissues in there that I think are really important for, we talked about it like flossing the teeth. You need that the connective tissue to help floss the teeth. They're really soft bones. They're really easy to crunch up. And then I do a lot of necks too, chicken necks, duck necks, turkey necks, wings. I do some drumsticks on occasion, and frames of smaller prey. I know you feed some rib, don't you, sometimes?
Yeah. I do pork and venison when we get it because my dog handles it well, but not every dog would. So it's one of those feed situationally, feed the dog in front of you type situations. I wouldn't give it to every dog, but I happen to know that my own dog handles it fine.
Yeah, and I used to feed it to Abel, our golden retriever, but just over the years, for me, I don't want to risk any tooth fractures, and it's kind of a little bit more dense than I am comfortable with. I know, like for you, your dog can handle it, and I know that my dogs could handle it too. But I just am a worry wart about it, so I don't do the ribs. But a lot of people have.
I mean, you can do like the off of poultry, the smaller, because you want to get those type of bones, because different types of bones. I mean, within bones, if you're going to feed over a variety of over time, your really best bet is you need to get the different types of bones, because different types of bones even contain different types of bone marrow. So you're going to get different benefits from different types of bones in the body. Ideally, you want to get as many of them in there on a rotation as you can if you're going to feed this way.
Right. And I do, like full whole rabbits and quail and chicken anytime I can. So I'm, doing the frames and the backs on those. So most people think that feeding bones are just for the calcium and the phosphorus content, and they don't realize how many other essential nutrients and vitamins that they contain.
Bone is full of so much more than that. It's such a huge matrix of minerals, especially. A lot of the minerals that maybe look like they're lacking when you run it through a spreadsheet, some of that we know is in bone. We don't know how much, but we know it's in bone. And the connective tissue surrounding the bone, because we're not analyzing that. So it's there. I can't tell you exactly how much is there, but it's there. And that's one of the reasons, these diets like Dr. Billinghurst teaches, where the foundation is the raw meaty bones, because raw meaty bones in themselves are perfectly balanced as far as minerals go. They're providing all those minerals in the right proportions. We don't have an accurate picture of exactly what it's providing. We know that it provides calcium in the form that dogs need it, in calcium phosphate, because you get that calcium phosphate, where that's not the same as if you don't feed a raw meaty bone and you use a calcium supplement. You're getting calcium, but you're not getting the same form of calcium that you'd be getting from bone, which is what their body is actually looking for. So, there's so many benefits to feeding bones beyond just, and I do think people do get stuck in that you need it for calcium, and you do. It is the primary source of calcium, but there's just so much more that you get from bone that's beyond that calcium.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't talk about that too, because again, tunnel vision, we're trying to just meet all these nutrients on paper, and the rest is put off to the side. And, like we just said, a big part of it is because those nutrients aren't being analyzed, because most of the food in the database is what humans are eating, and we're not eating raw bones.
Right.
So the data is not going to be there, and it's just kind of like a guessing game.
Yeah.
So a lot of concerns, I guess, people have about bones, obviously, is that they're going to shatter or splinter, and they're going to be highly dangerous to their pets. And it was a while ago, I did like a comparison on raw bones versus dehydrated or cooked bones.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I wrote a paper about that too.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. And they're two entirely different things. It literally changes the entire makeup of the food. And
well, as soon as you eat a bone, you break the collagen bonds, the protein bonds, which is why it breaks differently. you structurally change the bone as soon as you heat it.
Yeah. And so so when you're breaking into a raw bone, it's just going to break apart. And when you bite into a dehydrated or cooked bone, it's most likely going to, have a tougher time doing that, and it's going to splinter and, becomes more stiff. So that's a big thing that people need to realize, is that raw bones versus any cooked bones are completely different from each other. Not that you couldn't have a perforation. Anything is possible.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, so don't ever.
Dogs, like, I think I looked into it once, what the number one thing they choke on, it's like socks. So,
Yeah. I remember several years ago, like when our youngest was still a baby, and I guess our dog Abel ended up getting baby wipes. And thank God he didn't, have an obstruction. He was able to vomit it back up, but it was like this huge thing, baby wipes. Yeah. And I never saw him go after a diaper, so yeah, it's typically like socks or clothing items, or even toys, like dog toys a lot of the time.
Well, some dogs are like kids and they put everything in their mouths.
Right. That's how they, test the environment. Yeah. They figure out what things are.
And my dog, it's terrible, but my dog has gotten into a cooked chicken carcass left over that we had for dinner, and it was out in the garbage on the porch, and I let him out and I didn't even think about it, and I caught him as he was finishing it.
Oh no.
Yeah. So he ate the entire thing cooked. Not that he would ever intentionally do that, but he's done that before. Yeah. And I mean, he's got a strong gut. He was fine. He never, but there you go. There again, it is what it is. He got into it. He shouldn't have eaten it. It could have hurt him. Mm-hmm. He could, all of those pictures you see of dogs at the vets with their stomachs being x-rayed full of bones. It's always cooked bones, and it's always a dog that probably has a higher pH in their stomach because they're eating kibble every day. They're having trouble breaking it down. I mean, he shouldn't have eaten it, but he passed it just fine. Yeah. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he does eat bone regularly and his body is used to digesting it.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference. Just the other day, it was kind of the same situation. We had a bag of trail mix sitting on our end table, and I took the kids down to the bus stop, and when I came back, that bag was just like tore up and all the trail mix was gone. And guess what was in it? It was M&Ms and raisins and like peanuts, and thankfully it wasn't a whole lot, but I feel like he had a better chance at digesting it and not getting too sick from it, just because he's used to eating, raw things, and his immune system is a lot, more strengthened because of the way that he eats as compared to maybe a kibble fed dog. Yeah. And he did end up throwing it up a little bit, but he wasn't ever lethargic or he never showed any kind of sign of it. He just kind of got rid of it out of his system, and he went on his way. So, okay. So I personally don't feed, any dehydrated bone items. And I know this is a huge controversial thing too. So at one point I did sell freeze-dried small whole prey. And I think that there's a huge difference between freeze-dried and dehydrated as well. But I wasn't feeding any large bones. And so freeze-dried tend to crumble more than dehydrated. And I always, recommended people rehydrate it before feeding it.
Yeah. I used to get I bought the quail chicks for my cat that you did that were freeze dried, and he loves them. The only thing that freaked me out is because he's used to eating stuff like that, but that was the first time I had given him freeze dried, and he gagged a little bit, but it's just because it's dry. It's not because it was like he was getting it. I mean, he just kind of coughed it up and then tried again and it was fine. But, it's just the fact of the moisture being gone that can pose a
gone.
but not the same at all as dehydrating, because it's still technically in the same state. It just is, the moisture's gone. So if you add the moisture, you're right back where you started.
Okay, so I probably should have prepped myself a little bit more for the dehydrated. It's just been so long since I did the research. But if it's fresh on your mind, can you kind of tell people why dehydrated items like that are more risky than just
Well,
feeding
it's any
raw?
heat. When it comes to bone, it doesn't take much heat. It doesn't need to be high heat necessarily. Even heat in general breaks those collagen bonds, the protein bonds that are in the bone, and it changes the structure of the bone. So when you break those bonds, it automatically makes it harder. They break differently. They physically break differently. So you could take a raw bone and break it and see how it breaks. Take a dehydrated bone and break it. Like physically look at it. You can see a difference in how the bone breaks and how it feels. It feels sharper. It breaks in a more shattering type way, where a raw bone is a little more pliable, even just to our naked eye. But once it gets in the body, the way it digests once it's been heated is completely different. The body can't break it down the way it's supposed to, because you've already broken it down by process of heat before you put it in the body. So that already alters that structure. So it's harder to break down. And that's one of the reasons, and a lot of people don't know this either, but you know, as we age, we know this, as we age, we lose collagen, right? So our collagen bonds start to break down. If you feed an old, like, this is something I learned because I used to get cull chickens from a local farm as they aged out when they were too old to lay eggs anymore. The bones in those chickens, my dog had a harder time digesting them, and it didn't make sense to me at first. Well, it's because they were older chickens, and when you buy chicken intended for, you know, human consumption, they're super young. They're like 6 months old. They're young chickens. So it's that difference. The bone structure actually changes as an animal ages too. So that's another whole aspect that we don't even think about. But I found that out the hard way because I was feeding them to my dog, and it wasn't that he couldn't eat them. I just noticed a little more bone in his stool than normal, or like he was having a harder time crunching through the larger, like, drumstick bones. Seemed like they were harder for him to chew through than they normally were. But that's where I got into, like, well, that makes sense, like, logically, because as anything ages, those bonds start to break down, and it's as those bonds break that it becomes harder to digest the bone. So to super simplify it, it's just because those bonds break as you heat it.
Makes sense to me, anyways. um, so I guess the recommendation is, because you see all the single ingredient dehydrated treats like feet and wings and stuff like that. If you choose to feed those, I recommend just letting them soak in some warm water and letting them become more pliable
And
before
you
feeding
might
them.
feed those things for your dog's entire lifetime and never have a problem. You know, I mean, people do. You might feed it forever and never have a problem, but I just let people know that it is a possibility that if you're going to feed those, it is a higher risk than a raw bone is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I lost my train of thought. Well, we'll just move on because I forgot my train of thought. Sorry, I've been having a retinal migraine all weekend, and it's bugging me. But yeah, so I guess it's up to the person if they feel comfortable doing it. Just take some precautions if you do feed dehydrated bone. And I guess for folks, just realize that even though raw seems scary, it is the least risk of having perforations and punctures and blockages out of everything that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I guess people probably want to know, like, how much should they start with? So, and this is where you and I feel the same way. We need a good kind of guideline. So you have a good resource on your website where it shows you like what percentage body, like body weight for your dog, like how much food you should feed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm like right on with that. So like if my dog is 70 pounds, I want to feed him between 2 and 3% body weight. And that is roughly about what he eats. He eats about 2 pounds of
Yeah, and
food a day.
even in formulating, it always, as long as you stick, as long as it's not a high fat or hyper low fat meal, it falls in that range almost every time. You know, even when you're precisely sitting there measuring food, it typically falls in that weight range of that 2 to 3, or it works out in general as like 15 to 20% of their weight that they eat over the course of a week. Because that's what the old, like the ancestral model is. They eat 15 to 20% of their body weight over the course of about a week.
Yeah. And okay, so if they're eating, it's like say my dog, for example, if he's eating 2 pounds of food per day, people want to know how much of that 2 pounds in raw meat bones should he be eating. And the answer isn't just like a clean cut thing, because every individual is different. When I formulated, you know, he should be getting maybe 8 ounces of that in bone. But for him, he was, you know, maybe he was getting too hard of stool. It was coming out as pellets or maybe even a little bit white. So to me, you know, that means that he's eating too much bone and I need to back it off a little bit. So I guess what's a good starting percentage for people to like feed bone? Because for me, it was like 10 to 15%
Yeah,
of the meal should
that's
be.
my general guideline, says 10 to 15%, and then adjust it as needed for your pet. So that is right around the general guide. For cats, it can be a bit less. Cats, it's a whole nother weird situation, because if you look at it if you're to formulate for a cat, you'll see that in order to get that good calcium to phosphorus balance, cats, it's about 10% bone. But then if you look at general guidance as far as like PMR for cats, it will say feed that 6 to 8% bone, that cats need less bone. But if you put that into a spreadsheet, it doesn't work out. That phosphorus balance is not correct if it's not up to 10%. So that's a little weird. And a lot of cats don't do well with that much bone. So they do need less bone. So I dug into that a while ago. I came across this study that was independently done that showed they inversed the calcium to phosphorus ratios for cats just to see how far they could push it to where it was technically not in balance with what NRC says they need. And cats could tolerate a massive range of calcium to phosphorus. So that right there tells me that they don't, maybe, you know, if a cat does well on you're only feeding 6 to 8% of bone and that's where they function well, even if that doesn't look perfect on your sheet of paper, because it won't. It won't. It doesn't matter what raw meat bone you choose for a cat. If you want that to look perfect on paper without adding in any, you know, synthetic nutrients to do it, it has to be at least 10%. If your cat functions better on less, then according to that study that I found, and I can provide it for people that want to look at it, because I've sent it to clients before who have said, you know, the amount of bone that my cat needs, and I put it at the minimum amount that they needed. They'd say the amount of bone is just my cat's having trouble going to the bathroom, and there was nothing else that you could change that would affect it. But if you drop the bone down, the cat was fine. So that to me tells me right there, just in life experience, that that's maybe not correct. And that study showed long term, it was carried out pretty well. Some of them aren't carried out very well. This one was pretty well done. And it gave quite a large range where maybe the cats can have that lower bone percentage. If they function well there, then feed them there, is what I've been telling people for a while, ever since I came across that, because that became kind of a consistent thing. That's one of the issues that I was finding. If I put it perfect on a piece of paper and don't throw in an extra, like lower the bone, then throw an extra calcium supplement on top of it to make it perfect, a lot of cats don't handle that much bone well. My cat is fine with 10% bone. He eats that all day long and is fine, but not every cat is. So if they're having trouble with it, what do you do? I mean, you can't tell them that they have to eat that much bone and just deal with it. No, I mean, lower the bone. And then it worked out fine. I mean, it's only a little bit less bone in the diet. It doesn't look perfect on paper, but if the cat is suddenly functioning better, then
Yeah.
I guess you can't really ignore that.
Right. And that's all really what balance over time is. It's looking at your specific dog to figure out kind of, we have these guidelines, but we need to kind of fluctuate in between the guideline that best fits our individual pet, because no individual person is the same, and it's the same way with pets.
And with Bone, with my own dog, I don't feed the same amount. With Bone, I don't ever feed him the same amount on a daily basis. For me, Bone works out over the course of the week and always has, even when I was following more precise ways of feeding, just because I'm not going to sit there and like trim necks and wings and to fit that number. So I would just feed him. A lot of dogs can't handle it quite so well when you switch over to just like, maybe he'll eat his entire bone for the week over like 2 to 3 days, and then he won't get boned for a few days. But my dog handles that just fine. And I think if you get a dog that's got a good, healthy gut, they should be able to handle that. I think a lot of the dogs that don't handle it might be because something's a little out of whack inside of them to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
My dog does just fine. I've fed him bone that way for literally his entire life because I feed a lot of large things to him. So I'm not going to sit there and trim it. Like he'll eat an entire, we raise rabbits, so he eats rabbit a lot. If you skin a rabbit, that's kind of a bony meal, but he'll eat the whole thing, and then I'll just make up for the difference the rest of the week, and that works out fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one thing that just starting out in raw was I was feeding, turkey necks and stuff. And I'm like, how the heck do I trim this down to, 6.83 ounces?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to be like hacking away and having raw turkey flinging all over, my kitchen. So my OCD self was like, I wanted to get it down to that exact gram and ounce, but reality is like, that's not the way that things work. And so I finally had to like get my head out of that way of thinking and be like, it's okay if he has an 8-ounce turkey neck or whatever.
Yeah.
And because tomorrow I can feed a little bit less or nothing at all and then pick it back up throughout the week.
Yeah, I've had people like with chicken feet, like clipping toes to try to make, I'm like, no, don't.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah. Yeah, I ran myself ragged just trying to get like down to the gram. And, looking back on it, I'm just like, what the heck was I doing? It's a gram. It's not going to make that big of a difference, So people need to know that it's okay. We don't have to get exact.
Relax with it. Just relax.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, and the dog, it all goes back to the homeostasis inside the body. If you give them a little too much, they're not going to use it. They're just going to pass it out. There still might be a little bit crumbly or white. That's just the body expelling excess calcium that it didn't use, that it didn't need. It took in more than it needed. I mean, it'll work itself out. I think people get so hung up on all these little things that just, we need to relax about its food. It doesn't need to be some sort of perfection.
Right. And I think that's like the major issue with raw feeding is people get so overwhelmed and they get stressed out about it, and it really shouldn't be like that at all. So let's talk about we have to feed appropriate size bones for their size pet. So for me, I think like toy breeds and smaller breeds, they should stick to things like quail and chicken, wings and feet and necks. I don't think I would go any bigger than a neck or a wing for small breeds like that. Are you on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some small dogs that can go through some bigger stuff, but in general, I mean, stick to the smaller stuff that they're not going to struggle to get through. I mean, you can feed rabbit bone is generally pretty soft. So like most of the body of the rabbit, maybe not the back leg, but most of the body, the frames on some poultry is pretty, like my cat can get through it. So I always figure if my cat can get through it, a dog can probably get through it.
Yeah. I noticed with our cat Bing Bong, when I give him so he's used to kibble, right? He's been on kibble for like 5 or 6 years of his life, and he's only been on raw for probably the last year. And I've noticed he still has a little hard time doing the back legs of the quail, but if I kind of like hit it with the knife and just kind of break it up for him, he's got no problem.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people do that with small dogs too. They feed the larger bones, but they smash them up. And as long as you smash it up with meat covering it, that's fine. The dog can get through it.
Right. Okay. And then so like for medium breeds, I mean, like I said, I'm pretty conservative with the types that I feed, just because I just don't want to risk any tooth fractures. I'd rather just not even go there when I can use all this other stuff. So for medium breeds, I think even as big as like a chicken drumstick would be okay. But like once you get to turkey drumsticks, I think that's way too.
No. From turkey drumsticks are like a hard no from me. I don't care how big your dog is.
Yeah.
They're birds that are processed. They're birds that are processed older. So the bones break differently in them. Plus those turkey drumsticks, if you've ever pulled one apart, they've got that needle sharp tendon down the middle of them. I have cut my hand on those. I don't know how many times. And they're just too big of a risk for me. From a turkey, the only thing I feed my dog off of a turkey is the neck, the head, and then occasionally some of the rib or something. But the rest of the turkey, I avoid the bone in it just because they're old. They're older birds when they're processed than chickens or quail or pheasant or any of that stuff is. They're all processed really young, all those birds. Turkeys take longer to grow. They're older when they're processed, so their bones break differently.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the same page. Like I won't even feed the wing of the turkey. I think I've only fed neck,
the flat part and the tip to my dog, but even they, like, just watching him eat it, like he ate it and it was fine, but like just observing him eat it, I could tell it just wasn't breaking the same way as like a chicken wing would break. It's not worth it. It's not worth, there's plenty of other bones to feed. I don't need to feed it. Right.
Exactly. And it's the same with like the large breed dogs. I would never feed turkey. We don't ever feed any kind of weight bearing bone.
Right.
Obviously if it's a small pheasant or a rabbit or something, that's perfectly fine. But anything, I think larger than a chicken, I think you should just avoid it. And I know, some people feed like lamb shanks and stuff. Yeah. I think that might be okay for like a raw, recreational bone.
I mean, and like, okay, so wild, like wolves, they'll chew on that stuff. But I mean, that's where I differentiate, where like they could, it might be fine, but I have control over this because this is my pet. So I'm going to choose not to do it just because there's a higher risk there. And for you, the ribs are a higher risk. Like I haven't had any issues where I felt like they were threatening him. Maybe, and who knows, he could break a tooth. I'm aware he could break a tooth. He could break a tooth on anything, but he's been eating them since he was a puppy. So I continue to feed them. To him, he seems to chew through them he's good with ribs. He's weird because he'll suck a neck down like it's a piece of spaghetti and not even chew it. But he'll sit there and he'll chew because I give him big racks. I won't, if you do feed ribs, that's good advice for anybody if you're going to feed ribs. They're an item that if you're going to feed them, you don't want to trim that down to what you think they need in a day. You want to give it to them as big as you can and let them eat what you think they should be eating for the day and then take it away, because they do become a bit of a hazard for choking and tooth breaking and everything else if you give them too small.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I'll let my dogs like chew on the deer carcass or whatever. They'll get into the ribs and stuff there. But I really loved how you differentiated, like, yes, this is what, wild wolves and stuff were eating. They were eating bigger things, but that was for survival. We now have couch potatoes, that when we know better, we do better. And so although they could potentially be fine on it, why risk it when we do have control over what they eat? So just go with a less risky type of food. Just because it's like a super cool type protein, or it might be a novel protein that you can get, doesn't mean that you should feed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was one thing that when I first started raw feeding was, I was like, variety is key, and so I was just trying to find the weirdest stuff that I could give them. And I had a lot of fun with it, just trying to source like super weird things. But yeah, just, use some common sense in the fact that just because they could eat something doesn't mean that they should eat something, because wild versus domestic are two totally different things, although their insides work the same still.
Yes. Yes.
So is there anything, I guess, else in the raw meat eating bone category, boneless meat category? I mean, proteins, what kind of, let's talk about proteins, because we typically want to feed like ruminant animals, because once you get into carnivorous animals, you have something called biomagnification, where, a certain animal, the more animals that animal eats, the more the like trace minerals and stuff magnify. So like for fish example, they're high in mercury, or some could be high in mercury because of what those particular fish are eating. So you kind of want to stay away from that. Like alligator, they're eating other animals that are eating other things. It might be okay every once in a while, but you don't want to continue. So I typically stick to, I don't feed a whole lot of chicken, but if I do, it's going to be like pasture raised, free range. We'll do quail, I'll do pheasant, rabbit, do lamb, beef, pork. I don't typically get
you do turkey?
I do turkey. Yeah. I don't know. I think that's pretty much like what I stick to, and I just try to rotate it as much as I can. But I mean, how do you feel about feeding like kangaroo, if people can get, hold a kangaroo? And
a lot of here, it's not practical because we don't really have kangaroo. If I lived in Australia, I might feed a heavier emu and kangaroo diet because it's more available to me. Here, it's just, I mean, if I found like a good source and it was reasonably absolutely, I would feed it to my dog. I've fed him kangaroo, I've fed him emu, but they were like splurge things. They weren't necessary. Unless you got a dog that has a really limited need, like some super sensitivities to protein, it's not necessary, no.
Right. We do feed a lot of venison just because we hunt and have hunter friends. So we feed a lot of venison and elk.
Yep.
Let's see. Yeah, I don't want people to get caught up in having to feel like, variety is key, but it doesn't mean that you have to source all types of proteins.
Right.
You can rotate through whatever is easily available to you, what's within your budget, and just try to, just keep the variety within those.
I would rather
proteins.
see somebody focus as much as they can on getting the best quality that they can fit into their sourcing, their budget, of just, the things that are easy to come by for them where they are in the world. Some people, it is easier to source different things. Here, it's the chicken and beef and pork that are going to be the easiest for people to source. So for me, I tell people to focus on trying to obtain the best quality of what is available to them, because that's more important than getting a bunch of exotic meats in there that, are going to cost you an arm and a leg to feed.
Yeah. All right. And so I guess the next category would be organs. And so this is where I feel like, I mean, liver is essential, but I think a lot of the models out there are feeding way too much liver.
Yeah. Yeah,
Excuse me.
absolutely.
So now I typically only feed liver maybe a couple of times a week. And since I'm not, weighing it out, I can eyeball how much he should be just from formulating. But so for those that have no clue, what would you recommend, like the percentage of liver
Liver
that they should be feeding?
varies for me between 2 to 5%. And the way you determine how much you want to feed is got to be based on the source. So ruminant livers are going to be a lot higher in certain minerals than poultry livers are. So I would feed a ruminant liver, especially if you're feeding like a grain-fed, not grass-fed finished cow, which is what most people are feeding, because that's what's in the grocery store, is your beef liver that's grain-fed. That's really high in copper. So if you're going to feed 5% of that every single day, you're going to really be overdoing it on the copper in the diet. And that's something that will build up in the body over time. And then we see a lot of dogs, even raw fed, that develop liver issues, copper storage, all that, hepatic type issues. And I think it's because there's a lot of 5% beef liver in a lot of these commercial foods. Even you can get away with feeding 2%, 3% beef liver max, and you're still going to be providing well above what your dog needs for their vitamin A, and they're still going to be getting a plethora of minerals. They're going to get more than enough of everything. And then with the poultry livers, it's just the opposite. They are very low in copper. So for those, I say you can feed 5% of those if you're going to feed those. Duck, you got to be a little careful because it's really high in vitamin A. So that I say, again, maybe feed it a little bit less. Or with cats, I even tell people if they can tolerate both beef and chicken, to just split 5% in half and do half beef and half chicken, because that works out perfect. Like if you're going to use a spreadsheet, that works out perfect to what a cat needs if you just do half and half.
Interesting.
And then pork liver, we need to address pork liver, because that's one that a lot of people don't understand. Pork liver's got a little bit of a unique property in that it contains copper, but it's not bioavailable to your dog. So if you're feeding pork liver regularly and not rotating it with anything else, you're going to develop a copper deficiency over time, because they're just not going to be getting enough. The liver is the primary area of the diet where they're going to get that copper from, and it's essential, so they need it. And if you're not ever getting it, so if you feed pork liver, you need to also combine that with a liver that's high in copper, because they're going to need that copper somewhere, and it's going to come from the liver. So you need to combine it with something like a beef or a lamb liver that's going to provide more than enough copper for them, and just have it. But that 2% is really all you need with those livers. And if you start going above that every single day, I mean, it's fine if one day, I know people get a little upset, if they're prepping and they turn around and the dog eats, a week worth of liver or something all at once. I don't know how many messages I've gotten over the years of people panicking, like, are they going to get, are they going to die? What's going to happen? They ate the whole week's. No, maybe, like, worst case scenario, you might have a little loose stool for a couple days, but no, it'll be fine. And just don't feed it for a week, just let it go. Don't feed it. Don't put more in for the next week, and you'll be fine. My dog's done that, because I get liver in like the whole beef liver, like literally the whole, like they weigh like, I don't even know, like 10 pounds. They're huge. I get them from the meat processor, and then I bring them home. And as I'm bringing them in, Dexter has gotten into those, because he's like, it's Christmas to him when you walk in with stuff like that. He's gotten into it. He's eaten way more than he should. And then I just don't feed it for a while, let that work itself out, and it's fine. But that's another thing. So it doesn't have to be every single day either. If you're going to feed it, if you want to feed 5%, feed it every other day. Don't feed it every day.
Yeah. And I was in like a similar situation where I had to feed like a huge handful of liver, but I didn't feed it for him for like another 5 or 6 days. So I just want people to be mindful that if you are feeding like um, a large sum of liver or organ, that, like you said, it can cause some loose stool. So
It
just kind
can.
of be prepared for that. And it all just really depends on your dog too and how they handle that kind of thing. Um, I know that if I gave Abel a big chunk of liver, he would have explosive diarrhea. That's just him.
Yeah.
But I know if I gave Six a big chunk of liver and he was fine.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
that really
Dex,
just,
it doesn't phase Dex. It doesn't phase. I don't know what phases my dog. He can eat whatever and he just goes about his day.
yeah. I think it's probably because, I mean, since he was a puppy, you've been feeding him really
He's
well in lots of different
also
things.
exposed to all that stuff that really I feel dogs should be. I feed him on the ground. He eats
Hmm.
outside. He's exposed to, he eats poop. I mean, we have chickens, we have ducks, we have
Yeah.
pheasants, we have all these birds, and he follows them around like they're walking treat dispensers, you know?
Hmm.
He eats that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, and gross, yeah, but that's what dogs do. They do that stuff. It doesn't freak me out that he does it. He's fine. You know, I feel like
Yeah.
that's why he can eat all this stuff and it doesn't phase him because he's out there in it all the time and he's got his face up a chicken's butt half the day, you know?
Right. Yeah. And and that's like a huge difference to people that, live in the city and they're in apartments. What you feed your dog and what he can handle is totally separate than what somebody in a completely different environment can
Yeah,
feed.
it sucks. I know, like, if you live in a city, it's hard, but it sucks because it's really such a like vital part of their existence
Hmm.
to be in connection with the ground, not just, I mean, a lot of dogs, they get walked on concrete sidewalks only, their paws never touch the ground. They're not getting exposed from a young age out there to all of the stuff that is in the ground, in the soil, that really does have, and we're researching it. It has such a huge impact on their overall health and their gut health, everything, their possibly their longevity. Every one of these long living dogs, we're all like farm dogs, that are out. They're in it. They're out in all that. They're not in sterile environments. And I guess, if you live in the city, that's harder. That's harder to, provide that for your dog.
It is. Yeah. And so people who I guess do live in those kind of environments, they have to put a little bit more effort into making sure that they can take their dogs to the park or the woods, every so often, because it's really good mentally and
Yeah.
physically for
Yeah.
their pet. And yeah, so it's not that.
I've encouraged some of my clients that live in the city to take their dog on the weekend, because most people live somewhere where they could take a short enough drive where they could at least get them out into some sort of like nature and walk. Take them out, take treats with you, throw the treats out and let them forage for it through the ground. Like, that's so beneficial to dogs. People are really underestimating just how beneficial eating off the ground is. Like, that's my big thing. I've been pushing people to do that. And when I do recipes for puppies, I'll tell people, if you have clean ground that's not sprayed with pesticide, not sprayed with fertilizers or anything like that, take them outside while they're young and get them used to eating right off the grass, off the ground. Yeah, the food's gonna get dirty. People look at it like, ew, that's good.
Yeah.
But that's so good for them. It's so good for them. And it's like, I think, in my opinion, it's probably one of the aspects that bringing them in and domesticating them and putting them in our clean, sterile environments that they're missing. Like, that's part of their natural existence, is to be out and be in connection with that stuff. Their food, we feed them in bowls. They wouldn't be eating in bowls. They'd be dragging food through the muck and mud outside and then eating it.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing that like people obsess about, is like washing their bowls and stuff. And again, it just depends on your specific environment. So out here in the country, I don't have to worry about that, you know, but maybe in a apartment setting, I may have to do a little bit more, be more cognizant of cleaning the bowls and stuff. But if you go a few days without washing their bowl, they're gonna be fine. They're
I don't
like
use
you said.
bowls. I don't even use
Yeah.
bowls.
It just depends on how lazy I want to be. So sometimes I'll just dump it right out, you know, the back door. I mean, a lot of times I do put it on the in the bowl on the concrete patio, like when it's cold and rainy.
I'm a big
But yeah,
fan of the wood board.
yeah,
I'm a big fan of feeding on the boards. That's my preferred surface. That's what I teach people to feed off of if they can. It's a flat surface. It's more natural. I mean, half the time you put food in a bowl, what's the first thing they do? They take it out and put it on the floor anyway.
mm-hmm.
They like
Yeah,
to eat. I mean, both dogs and cats don't really like, that's something we came up with, putting your face in a bowl. They don't really, it's not a natural instinct for them at all. They want to eat off of a plane where they can see, especially cats. Cats almost always, they'll pull their food out, put it on the ground, just skip the
mm-hmm.
step, put it on a flat surface for the cat so that they feel more comfortable eating and they'll eat in a more natural manner. They don't like their face. Cats get whisker stress, it's called. If they stick their faces into a bowl, they don't like their whiskers to touch the edge of a bowl. It deters them. I've had people tell me their cats won't eat something, and I ask them what they're feeding it in, or send me a picture of the bowl of what you're feeding, and they'll have these bowls with really tall rims on the side, and I said, dump it on a plate and see if they'll eat it. And sometimes it's just that simple. Dump it on a plate and suddenly they'll eat that food. They don't like their food down in that dish. It's not normal for them to eat that way, and they don't like it. A lot of cats are really fussy about that, and they just flat out won't eat food if you put it in a bowl like that. Put it on a
That's really
plate.
interesting. I never really thought about that because I mean, I've seen my dog, you know, he'll take the bones and he'll drag it out of the bowl into the yard and go eat it down in the yard. But our cat, he almost always drags his food out of the bowl and puts it down on the floor. Or if he needs to, you know, like work on the quail bone, he'll even take it to a separate room to where he's more, you
Yeah,
know, by himself
it's
and work on it.
instinctual. It's all instincts that we can't, it's in them. It's their instincts to want to. Cats really want to eat where they can stay crouched down, and they want to be able to see their surroundings. So there's a science behind it too as to why they don't like it in the bowl. They don't like their whiskers touching. They're animals that would be, they hunt, then they would take their prey somewhere where they feel safe to eat it. They often don't eat it right where they kill it. They take it off somewhere where they feel protected, where they can see their surroundings to make sure nothing's going to come and steal it from them. Even though we're feeding them food out of a bowl, those instincts are still in the animal. It's in their DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So just feed them on a flat surface, and then they're a lot happier to begin with.
It makes total sense when you bring it back to basics. It makes total sense. I never really even thought about their whiskers hitting the side of the bowl and how annoying that would be. So I'm not going to feed out of the bowl anymore. Thank you.
Or feed out of a very shallow, wide. They sell bowls for cats now that are called anti-whisker fatigue bowls, but they're not. Just feed them on a plate. Or I buy the little tiny, I feed my cat on little mini, they're like bar cutting boards, the little small ones, because they're perfect for him.
Yeah, I'm totally going to do that now. All right. Well, let's bring it back to the organs real quick. So I think it's great that people know that they can feed pork liver, because you always hear, don't feed pork liver. And it's because the copper issue, but it's not that you can't feed pork liver. It still has vitamin A. You just can't, that can't be the only
it has lots of great
liver.
things. It has lots of great aspects. You're just not going to get copper from it. So just don't feed it every day. Don't rely on that as your only source of liver. Use it in rotation. You can bring it in, feed it, but just know that as long as you are mindful of the fact that, that your dog, your cat, they need copper. They're not getting it when they eat this. So feed something that they will get it from tomorrow instead of a pork liver again.
Yeah. And I see pork liver just as much as I do beef liver in the grocery stores. So it is a good source
Yeah,
of
and pork
vitamin A for your
liver,
pet.
for me, it's one of the few things I can get locally from like good, well-fed pigs. So I
Hmm.
do feed it. I feed it in rotation because it's one of the few things, good sources of liver that I have.
Yeah. And okay, so then you want to feed other organs, and we have deemed them secreting organs like eyes and brain and thymus and pancreas and spleen. What percentage do you think that people should stick with in that category? Is it kind of the same as the liver?
Well, for me, I say like the percentage model that I created has other organ as 6 to 8%.
Okay,
Because
it's a little bit more.
honestly, you can go higher or you can go, it could be less, it could be more. That's a general guide where it fits pretty good. It doesn't tend to be like liver where if they eat more of it, their stool might explode. It's not quite as rich as that. Kind of comes from the liver part more than kidney is probably the number one thing that people reach for because it's easily accessible everywhere. And it often works out, especially if you're not like looking at nutrients. If you feed a little bit more of it, you're likely to cover a lot of those minerals that might be a little bit lower otherwise. It's a great source of selenium, so you can get that antioxidant benefit in there from that. It's a good source of so many things. So I say 6 to 8% for everything other than spleen. Spleen
Mhm.
is the only thing that I caution people not to feed too much of it on a regular basis because it's so high in iron. So unless you have a growing puppy or kitten, it can be a lot. That would be a little too much iron consistently every single day. So that's another thing. If you're going to feed on a balance over time regimen, having like little knowledge bits like that to know like feed
Mhm.
spleen. Spleen is fine, but I wouldn't go over feeding like 2% of it on a regular basis or all the time. Feed it, if you can get spleen, feed it till it's gone and then don't feed it again for a while. Give the body a chance to recuperate from that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's there's one called sweetbreads, which I believe are like thymus and what's the other
Pancreas.
part of it?
Pancreas.
Pancreas. Yeah. So when I first started raw feeding, they said to use caution with especially the thymus, and that's because it secretes hormones and stuff like that. Again, if you're doing like a balance over time issue, it's all about moderation. That can't be your only source of organ. And if that's all you can, like you said, if you had ordered like a pound of it and it's all thawed out, you can feed that throughout the week or so, but then just know that the next week or two feed something completely different.
Yep.
And it's yeah, all these things provide benefits to your pets. We just need to use some common sense and just don't feed it day in and day out and a lot of it.
And that's where people get in
Um,
trouble. And that's where you start seeing, that's where a lot of the negative, I think, comes from people that are against feeding a balanced overtime diet is because people get stuck on feeding the same thing over and over again. And
mhm.
that's got to be like a big aspect of it is you can't do that. You can't get stuck on feeding the same exact things over and over again if you're going to do it this way.
So I guess I'll say I'm going to write this question down. We'll save it for a different podcast. But okay, I was going to say what we'll talk about in a different podcast. Like, what do people do when they have just limited resources? They can only source these things. So we'll make a whole entire separate topic about that. Okay, so base is raw meat and bones and boneless meat. Then we have a little bit of organ, obviously liver, and then rotate your other secreting organs. And then vegetables, I think, should be probably the next area. For me, my favorite way to feed is fermenting. It's super easy, it's really cheap, everything's already broken down for you. or for the dog, and you're also getting the probiotics in there as well. So I think that kind of sits like next up on the tier. Percentage wise, maybe the same, like 5 to 10%, maybe. I don't know where we're sitting at on our little pie chart. I don't know. I wasn't taking notes, but somewhere around there, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I would say 5 to 10% would be the max I would feed on that,
Max.
and feed it based on your dog. I have a dog who despises vegetation, like despises it. So other than fermented, so I've gotten crafty and I feed him fermented via what my rabbits eat, which everyone can't do that, but that's how
Right.
I do it. I feed my rabbits a variety of the vegetation that I want him to eat. And then when we process the rabbits, that's what he gets the stomach contents
That is
of, and that he
awesome.
loves.
Yeah.
That he loves. I can put a single, it doesn't matter what it is. Kinley, I've fermented the entire produce aisle trying to find something that he would eat. He doesn't like it. And I'm a big believer in allowing some self-selection with your pets, because they do have, intuitions as far as what they need and want. So I also do the gut. I've also tested his gut biome several times. And like when I was forcing a lot of vegetation into him, his gut biome tests were coming back worse than they were if I just let him do his thing and let him pick it. I mean, there's so many benefits, which is why I think the products that you make are really great, because he'll eat stuff like that so he can get all those phytonutrients that are really beneficial from all that vegetation that he just doesn't like to eat. Like, he's a dog that he gets gassy if he eats too much vegetation. I mean, he'll pick it out. He's like a picky 5-year-old that'll sit there in the smallest little piece of a piece of broccoli. He will pick it out. I give him 2 pounds of food and he'll pick out the tiniest little piece out of there and he won't eat it. So for me, I really emphasize to feed a good variety of vegetation. If your dog likes it, if they don't, to utilize, powder type phytonutrient filled supplements to get that into them, because most dogs will consume that. And that's what I use primarily for my dog. That, and then I have the stomach content thing, but that's something somebody needs to package that and sell it for dogs because that's perfect.
Heck yeah, that is. That's, I don't think I ever would have done that, like realized to do that, just to feed the stomach contents of the animals that I'm already raising. I think
my rabbits, they're fed a strictly organic diet. They don't eat rabbit pellets. They only eat fresh food and like things that I would be fermenting and feeding to my dog. So I'm like, what am I doing? It's right there. It's already done for me. When we process rabbits, stomach contents go into a bag, and that's what he gets.
That's awesome. I wish I could feed that. 6 is pretty good. He'll eat almost anything I put in front of him. He's a lab, so he's a garbage disposal. So let's talk about why we have to break down vegetation. Because the wolves in the wild, they were eating the pre-digested stomach contents of their prey. So that's probably why your dog likes it. Like they like that. They have flavor, that, I guess.
Intuition. It's another intuitive thing, it's the intuition of like, and he doesn't always eat it. I'm super observant with him when it comes to this stuff, because he'll eat it like it's the best thing he's ever tasted sometimes, and he'll just sit there and eat it. And other times he'll just kind of pick and then he'll leave it. And I figure if he's leaving it, then that means he doesn't need it today. They're really, I'm super big with that with my own pets, was letting them self-select things. We grow a self-selection garden for them. I give them self-selection choices of water and everything on a daily basis, because I find it fascinating. So I do think there is some intuition in there with that, because he will choose not to eat the fermented stuff that I make in a jar for him, but he will eat it when it comes from the rabbit's stomach. So Does he know it's
Yeah. And
better for him? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe he just knows that that's intuitively that's what he should be eating. I mean, that's obviously fermented slightly different when it happens inside of a body
right.
than it does inside a jar.
Hmm. As I say, maybe it's like the tanginess of the, the ferment that you're doing as compared to what's in the content of the animal. Um, that might be, it might be a texture thing or a scent thing. So it does make sense that they would prefer, something that's already naturally done. And so the reason why we have to do this is because although dogs and cats have the digestive enzyme to break plant material down, it's not enough. It doesn't do a good job at really doing that. So if we could do that for them, they're able to utilize the phytonutrients and everything in the plants. So, and that kind of, when I started this business, I had to really think about how I wanted to process all this plant material, but also retain as many nutrients as I possibly could. So that's why I use, either dehydrated or freeze dried, and it's pulverized into a powder. There's several other companies that do offer fermented, freeze dried, or dehydrated plant matter as well, which are really great options. But not everybody, has the money to do that. So they can simply do it by, I don't really like steaming the vegetables unless, I don't know, I feel like that should be like a last option just because, you're cooking some of the nutrients out. It's going into the water.
The
So
only
you have to feed the
things
water
that
too.
might, in my opinion, the only things that might benefit from steaming are like the really high oxalate type vegetables, just because it does reduce that part of it if you're going to feed those things on a regular basis. But again, you really shouldn't be feeding any of the same exact thing on a regular basis either. So, but some people will get stuck on, kale and spinach, and that's it. And those are both things that if you're going to consume them every single day, you might be better off, even though you're going to lose some nutrients, steaming it because you're going to reduce some of the oxalates in those things.
Yeah, exactly true. I guess it all just depends on what you're trying to feed. Another good way I think is like using a juicer.
Yeah.
You can have the juice, but also the pulp left up in the top.
Yeah.
So that's already pulverized. Yeah, just mix it together, make it into like little patties or freeze it into little molds, pop them in the freezer, and then, you can just take one out and put it in the bowl
I did a huge
dog.
batch once with my juicer for Dexter, and then I made up like meatballs for him, and the picky little shit wouldn't eat them because it was all the vegetables.
You just need to like wrap them in tripe or something, something stinky.
I don't know.
I did that one time. I mean, Six will eat it, no problem, but I used like a fish stock in with the fermented vegetables. Just, something different. It's more appetizing, more appealing. So, and another reason why they need plant matter isn't just because of all the amazing phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals in it, but they also offer fiber. So your pets still need to have some fiber, even though they are carnivorous and opportunistic carnivores. So that's another, because I hear a lot of the times like
there's differences between animal and plant-based fiber, because there's animal-based fibers too that can also provide, but they provide different things. So I recommend always that people rotate between the two or feed both simultaneously, because different things are going to feed off of the animal-based fibers. And there's a lot more fiber in animal-based stuff than people realize. It's not just fur and feathers. They don't fully break down some of those ligaments and tendons that are in foods. If you look closely after you've fed something that's really dense with those fibrous parts of an animal, you'll see it in the stool sometimes because it doesn't fully break down. And that also acts as fiber. There's so many things inside, if you're feeding whole prey, that you'll notice do act as fiber, as well as the fur and the feathers. But, feeding those really high cartilage parts of an animal they don't fully break down all the way either. So there's a lot of animal-based fiber, and they provide different benefits. So you're feeding different bacteria. And for fiber, I'm always trying to explain that to people. It's not about what your dog is getting from it. It's about what the gut is getting from it that really affects what you should be feeding there. And like, you know, there's so many different ways of adding in fiber as far as vegetation, from seeds even, and stuff like that, that they can get fiber from in different forms.
Yeah, again, just variety, try different things, try different ways of feeding. Excuse me. And then I think that at the one more step on that, I think should be fruit. It should be kept to a minimum. But again, I think it's essential because, wolves were eating the contents of their prey, and they're feeding on berries and grasses and whatnot. So when I feed fruit, I typically look for berries. They're really high in antioxidants, and they're typically lower on the glycemic index, so they're not really going to shoot the blood sugar level up. It doesn't mean that people can't feed things like bananas or mangoes or, apples and stuff like that. You want to make sure that you're feeding higher content, like higher sugar content fruits at a very minimum. Excuse me. So I tend to I just stick with berries for the most part. I try to rotate them all. I smash them. I don't know if you really have to. You think you have to smash berries?
You should. I feed a small amount. I stick with berries too. And I stick between wild blueberries, goji berries, and aronia berries. That's just because that's what we grow here. So that's what I feed him. I feed him what we grow. And I started doing the kombucha fermented berries. It's such a simple process. You can buy store-bought kombucha if you don't make it. I'm one of those people who makes it, but like if you don't make it, you can do a quick one day, sitting in a jar, cover them, smash them, cover them with, and it ferments them enough where I think they're probably getting a lot more benefit from the berry than they are if you just throw it in the bowl. That's what I started doing. Dexter will eat a little bit of that. He's not a big fruit eater either, but he will eat a little bit of those because he does like the kombucha, which that's weird to me, but he loves that.
That is.
Yeah, he loves that. So I think that's why he likes the berries when I do. I just started doing that. I watched Billy Hookman talk about that, about fermenting berries with kombucha. And I was like, why have I not thought of that? Like I literally
For real.
I've been making my own kombucha for 10 years. And part of the process, if you want to flavor it, is to add fruit and then let it sit and then remove the fruit. I'm throwing that fruit away. I'm like, now I'm feeding it to Dexter. I was like, why was that? Well, I wasn't throwing it away. I was throwing it out and letting the chickens eat it. But and I'm like, why am I not feeding that to him? So now I do.
Yeah, it's sometimes, and just you mentioning that, because that's something that I had wanted to do in the past. I'm like, why should I not? How can I ferment fruit, really?
Yeah, and, without making wine. Like, don't let it go so.
Right. Yes, I was always afraid that I was just gonna do it too much to where it started making wine, and so I never did it.
Buy a good like store-bought kombucha, like GT's or something, one of the like mellow flavors of that, and all you gotta do is smash your berries, cover them, let it sit at room temperature for like 24 hours, and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm totally doing that. I was trying to make kombucha for myself, but it doesn't agree with me, so I never got into that. But so I'm definitely going to do that now, and I'm on board. So and I think with your dog Dexter, although Six will eat anything, I think it's really important that people know that self-selection, like your dog is self-selecting these things. I think that fruits and vegetables don't necessarily have to be in the diet, but I think that they're incredibly beneficial. So if you can get your pets to eat them, there's many different things that you can do to get them to eat it, and there's different ways to prep them. And there's so many different types of plants and fruits and all that that you can try to see what your pet will eat. So that's why I think that they're more up on the top of, the raw food pyramid. It's not a necessity, but I think it's incredibly beneficial. And then, so for me, the last little tip of the raw food pyramid would be your whole food supplements. So I know in our past episodes, we touched on like our dogs and wild wolves weren't going and fishing out mussels, or kelp. So they had to be getting it from their diet, somewhere. And obviously our food isn't as nutrient dense as it used to be. So we may have to supplement the diet now through
Our
supplements.
food's not as dense, and then they're also, most people aren't getting the whole animal. They're missing all of those glands and all of the connection of the whole animal. We're just feeding bits and pieces from a grocery store. So you're missing a lot, you're missing a whole heck of a lot when you do that you don't get when you eat an entire animal.
Right. I think people call it like the Franken-Prey diet or whatever.
That was originally how I learned to feed, was that Franken-Prey. Like, you're basically building an animal within the bowl as much as you can, including and that's another reason, like, for anybody who can't feed whole prey ever, I'm a big proponent of telling people to feed a glandular supplement. You get all those things that you're missing in a glandular supplement, and they're so beneficial. You can eliminate a lot of things if you just get a good glandular in there. If that's a good chunk of what they're missing when you're piecing together a meal, is all those glands that, maybe you can't source everything that is going to be in a whole animal, but if you add that in there, you get a whole bunch. I mean, you get a little bit of thyroid tissue. So maybe, because kelp, they're not out there eating kelp, can be beneficial, sure. I mean, kelp is great for iodine. You need it from somewhere. Kelp is also really great for a whole bunch of minerals. It's not just iodine. I mean, we treat it like it's an iodine supplement a lot of times in this community, which drives me nuts, because kelp is such a mineral rich product. Like, it provides so much more than iodine, but again, that's not something that they would be getting. So you have to look at, where would they get it from? Well, they'd be consuming thyroid glands, and that's where a lot of iodine is stored in the body. So they'd be getting it when they're eating a whole animal. They'd be eating that gland all the time. In a small prey animal, they'd be eating that little gland. And when I feed whole prey, I know that they are getting that. I feed whole rabbits, and I'm not cleaning things like that off of them. I'm letting them eat all of that.
Right. And so for people that aren't able to feed the whole prey, or even be able to source glands, where should they go? Like, I don't think I've ever seen, well, I've never really looked at a glandular supplement before, just because I do
good ones. There's so many good glandular supplements in it. There's even there's a pet one that it's My Pet's Friend. It's a brand that they sent me products a long time ago, and I loved them. They have a great glandular product. It literally contains all the organs, all the glands, all from grass-fed cows. Super good product. That's a great one. You can also get individual glandulars from so many different companies anymore, because they become a lot more popular. I can give you a list if you want to look into them. I'll provide it for people that want to look into them. But it's such a valuable, if you can't feed whole prey, it's such a valuable thing to add to the diet, because you get, there's all these little things that you get from those glands that they're so tiny. It doesn't seem like it'd be too important, but it really is. It's a part of the big picture that we're missing.
Yeah, I think so. If you can either share it with me, or you can put it on your whatever, because you don't ever see that in the raw feeding community, is look for a glandular supplement.
Well, I've said it several times.
Have you?
Yes.
Well, I missed it. Sorry. Okay, so supplementing the rest of the diet through whole foods. I think if you want to add in mussels, I think go ahead and do that. But it doesn't have to be like every meal. I think maybe just even once or twice a week. I think fish probably fit in this category for me too. Um, just for my own circumstance, I guess, because I do feed a lot of wild game, and I know that there's more nutrients in that type of food, so I don't need to necessarily
People
feed
are
fish every
feeding,
day.
we're promoting feeding fish primarily because we need more vitamin D and we
Mhm.
need more omega-3 fats. If you're feeding wild game, you're automatically getting more vitamin D and more omega-3
Mhm.
fats in that meat itself. So yeah, I
Okay.
mean, it's got to be like a situational thing. Because if somebody's going to
Mhm.
Walmart and buying chicken quarters and ground beef, they're
Yeah,
going to need some fish.
they'll need
It's
more.
diet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, again, it's literally just like taking in your situation, what you can source depends on what supplements you're going to have to use. So, like you said, if you're just feeding like a lot of chicken, you're going to have to supplement more vitamin D. You're probably going to have to supplement more vitamin E. You're probably going to have to, get in the iodine and all that. So some other examples of whole foods that we can add on top of this is, your whole fish, your mussels. Brewer's yeast is a really good one. Has lots of B vitamins in it that a lot of people are going to miss because they can only get a hold of certain foods. Um, I think this is where like your raw milks and your kefir and yogurts, Greek yogurts, your eggs. I think those are all incredibly beneficial that don't necessarily have to be fed day in and day out. They just help round out and balance the meal over time. Are there any other supplements that
I
you
mean,
think
that kind of
people need to
covers
use?
all of those. That kind of covers everything. I mean, I think eggs are really super underrated.
Yeah.
If you can get a good egg, and I don't mean like go to the grocery store and buy the egg, the factory farmed egg. I mean, like if you could find somebody who raises chickens and get an egg, it's a totally different egg than the egg that you're getting at the grocery store. You can
Mm-hmm.
fulfill vitamin D needs with that egg alone if you get an egg from a chicken that spends all day outside eating grass and bugs and is in the sun. You get like 30 IUs of vitamin D from a store-bought egg, but you can get as much as like, I forget, it's an absurd amount more. It's like
Mm-hmm.
20 times the vitamin
Holy
D in an
cow.
egg. Yeah, in an egg from a chicken that's actually lived like a chicken is supposed to live. It's
Yeah,
real
that's
easy,
nuts.
real easy to me. And the omega-3 content is through the roof too, as compared to even, the grocery store, you'll see omega-3 eggs. It's because there's feed for chickens that contains that additional omega-3. So they say you get 25% more omega-3 when you buy those eggs. But what that is the feed is 25% higher in omega-3 that the chicken's eating. But if you look into it, the chicken that eats that feed is only converting about 5% of that. So you're kind of wasting your money. You're not really getting what is advertised when you're buying those eggs. You'll get it if you get a chicken egg from a chicken that's been outside in the sun and it eats bugs and it eats grass. The omega-3 content suddenly skyrockets through the roof compared to that egg. And that's that egg that we're looking at on USDA. That's the commercial egg. That's not, that's not. So I think, and I know eggs have gotten stupid expensive, but for your money, an egg from a well-raised chicken is one of the most it's a multivitamin. Get it if you can, and get it and feed them. I feed them every day, but my dog, we have so many eggs, because I have all these birds that lay eggs. Dexter goes out and helps himself. He'll eat eggs right out of the nest box. As I'm sitting there collecting them, he's over there helping himself to eggs the entire time. And I'm like, get out of here. But they're so good. Like an egg is it's such an underrated food. It provides so much.
Yeah, I never really would have thought about getting vitamin D from the egg in that.
It's really high. They've tested chicken eggs. They've tested so many chicken eggs from chickens that actually spend their time out in the sun, and the vitamin D is crazy high because chickens, they're not like dogs, they're like us, where if they're in the sun, they produce more vitamin D. So if your chicken is out in the sun, they're producing a lot of vitamin D, and that vitamin D translates right through to the egg. It also translates through to the fat of the chicken when you process
the skin too.
Yeah, so I mean, that chicken that you see in the grocery store is like, it's pretty devoid of vitamin D because they're kept primarily in large built. They never see sunlight in their life, you know? And what we supplement through the diet is minimal, and then it doesn't stick in, it doesn't hold on in the fat the same way it does when they're getting it from the sun outside. That's why the meat looks different. The fat color is different. Everything about it's different because they're actually you're probably getting enough vitamin D from that chicken alone when you feed it. The chicken that's actually lived its life the way a chicken is supposed to.
Yeah. I don't think many people realize, how much they can get just from eggs. And so the one last whole food I want to talk about is vitamin E. You see everybody like putting vitamin E into everything. And again, I think it all comes down to sourcing, and I get it. I get it. If people can only afford the Tyson grocery store chicken, get it. But you will have to probably supplement more on the back end, and that's totally fine. But if you can raise your own chickens, more and more people are doing that, especially now with, the food crisis going on. We're actually in the process of building the coop here. Tons of neighbors have eggs. Just go down the street, pick up a thing of eggs.
The vitamin E in those eggs is extremely high too. So there again, it's not reflected when you look at USDA data. It doesn't show you, it shows you get like a tiny little bit of vitamin E. But that's not a reflection of a chicken that's been out in the sun and living the way most people, individuals, even if they keep them in a coop, they're still outside seeing the sunlight every day. They're still probably eating better. Even if you feed commercial chicken food, your chickens are probably still going to be better, healthier. The egg from those chickens, the meat from those chickens, it's going to be different than what we look at on USDA as far as chicken goes.
Absolutely. And so, bringing it back to the vitamin E. So if you're getting these free range pastured chickens, you don't necessarily have to supplement with vitamin E. It just depends on your sourcing. A lot of this just depends on your sourcing. So
I think a lot of people are over supplementing the vitamin E, over supplementing, and then if you're going to use a supplement, a lot of people are using an alpha tocopherol product only, which I don't agree with that personally. Just because alpha tocopherol is literally the least important part of a vitamin E as far as your health goes. It's a preservative. So it's why it's used in everything to preserve everything, because it's essentially a preservative. Vitamin E, it's one little tiny piece of what vitamin E is as a whole. So if you're going to supplement a vitamin E, I highly recommend you at least get something that's a mixed tocopherol, or better yet, something that's a complete vitamin E, which contains the tocotrienols, which is where really all the health studied benefits of vitamin E come from, is that part that most people aren't even feeding when they're supplementing a vitamin E. It's super interesting if you get into it, but like that is where all of those protective properties that, like, you read studies about the health benefits of like lowering cancer risk and all of these things from consuming vitamin E. But if you're consuming alpha tocopherol only, it's literally the exact opposite. There are studies showing that consuming that only on a daily basis increases your risk for all kinds of health problems. So there's that too. If you're going to supplement, take the time to make sure you're getting the right supplement in there, because just an alpha tocopherol product alone is doing more harm than good, in my opinion. It's a preservative only. It's not giving you all those health benefits that you're looking to get if you're going to give a supplement for something.
Yeah, Thank you for pointing that out, because there's so many different types of vitamin E supplements out there. It's so easy to get lost in the sauce. And, you know, with supplements, I always try to look for whole foods, just because the body is going to recognize it. It's going to work oh my God, I can't even say that word. Synergistically together for the optimum result, instead of picking these isolates out that
The body can
like
do more.
yeah.
If you take nothing away from supplements, understand the body can do more with less coming from a whole food than it can with 10 times more coming from an isolate. It's just a fact of biology. It works that way. The body looks for, it's not natural to put anything in one isolate form. The body will, if you have a deficiency in something and you put it in there, you'll correct it quickly because the body's looking for it. It's looking for it. So you'll correct it pretty quickly if you do that. But on a long-term basis, it's not meant to work that way. And it'll promote imbalance if you continue to do it over time, because it's not the way the body works. It'll look for everything that would normally be with it to like throw it together inside. It's like a puzzle. If you put two puzzle pieces together that don't fit quite right, you can make them fit, but it won't, they're hard to break apart too. So you put a supplement in and it gets together. We chelate supplements with other things to make them more bioavailable in the body. It actually makes it harder for the body to use it a lot of times because it has to then separate it and then find, it doesn't work the same as it does with food.
So if you're going to use supplements, you definitely have to do your due diligence to find whole food sources and some that your animals are going to be able to utilize.
Yes.
So we are 30 minutes over our time, Erin.
Oh my goodness. You're right. I didn't even realize.
I didn't either. I mean, we can go on for days about this kind of thing. Okay, so we'll just wrap it up. So our balance over time consists of majority raw meaty bones and boneless meat with a little bit of liver and a little bit of secreting organ. If your pets will eat them, some fruits, some vegetables, and then we balance all the little missing nutrients out with whole food supplements. That way we're not just feeding supplements with a little bit of food, we're actually feeding food with a little bit of supplement. Is there anything else you want to contribute before we hop off here?
No, I guess not. We've kind of gone over.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited about how we can help people if they're only able to source like a limited variety, how they should be feeding, because I feel like a lot of people, like, they don't have the freezer space and they don't have the resources to do it. So maybe we can talk about that next week. We can talk offline about what we want to do next week. But as far as questions, if anybody has any questions over how to balance over time, please leave your comments and questions over on YouTube. It's The Raw Truth. If you guys can like and subscribe to that, we'd be forever grateful. It helps get the word out to more pet parents. And Erin, I guess I will see you next Monday.
Okay. See ya.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a good week.